The following is a conversation with Andy Schectman. Andy is the president and owner of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. Prior to starting Miles Franklin in 1989, Andrew became a licensed financial planner, specializing in Swiss franc investments and alternative investments. At Miles Franklin, a company that has eclipsed $5 billion in sales, Andrew has developed an operation that maintains trust, collaboration, ethical behavior, superior customer service, and satisfaction to better serve their clients. He is responsible for overseeing the firm's operations and business functions, including strategy and planning, account management, finance, and new business. I discovered Andy through Robert Kiyoski, the best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Andy and Robert are close friends, and their latest conversation on YouTube blew my mind, so I decided to reach out to Andy and invite him on the podcast. Over the last year, I've been diving into the world of finance, trying to understand how fiat money, banks, assets, and debt all work as a system. Some of you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with health? Well, one of the top sources of stress affecting people's health today is money. So in this conversation, Andy and I are going to get into a 101 version of the history of banking and how money works or doesn't work for you. I am deeply disturbed that they do not teach basic finance in high school or college, nor do they give our youth any kind of education, setting them up for financial success down the road. Hence why I'll be diving deeper into this topic as the months and years go on. I recommend listening to this episode more than once. You are listening to the Co-Movement Gym podcast, where we inspire people to move and live courageously. If you are enjoying this content, please support our sponsors in the description. I thank each and every one of you for being on this journey with us. Now, please enjoy the show. Folks, listen up. I want to take a brief moment and thank our podcast show sponsors, Lombardi Chiropractic, Native Path Supplements, and Redmond Life. Lombardi Chiropractic has been my personal chiropractor for 10 years and has kept my body strong and healthy. Native Path supplements are used by numerous co-movement clients and our coaching team here at the facility. I highly recommend that you try their chocolate collagen peptides. I was made aware of Redmond Life by one of our trainers here at the facility. He recommended I try Relight electrolyte powder. This supplement has dramatically improved my afternoon energy levels and overall hydration. I'd like to thank these three companies for providing outstanding service and products that make our society healthier and more resilient. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast when you call Lombardi Chiropractic, and not only will they treat you like family, they will provide a nice, enticing discount to all listeners. And use code COMO15, that's C-O-M-O 15, at checkout when shopping at nativepath.com or redmond.life and receive 15% off all your orders. Your support to our show sponsors assists in us paying for expenses and continuing to provide content we hope you all enjoy. All right, today we have Andy on the Co-Movement Gym podcast. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing well, buddy. Thanks for having me, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I want to dive right in. I want to start off with some crazy statistics here regarding money. And so for the listeners, and me and you just chatted about this prior to hopping on this call, but some people might be asking themselves, what does fitness and health have to do with finance? And this is a new subject area that I'm very interested in and passionate about, because what I've discovered is that when someone doesn't have their financial life in order, their physical health and freedom in life is lacking because they can't hire a trainer, or they can't buy the healthy food, or they can't have a gym membership, right? And so if clients and people listening can have a better understanding of finance and have what I call financial health, right? We have physical health, mental health, emotional health, but financial health, I feel there's a direct connection to fitness and health in general because you have more options in life.
Well, there's no question. I mean, none. I've worked out my whole life. I've been into athletics and sports, and my whole life. And if one end of the spectrum is messed up, it's difficult to make the other one line up.
Mhm.
And if you're concerned about, making ends meet, it's difficult to get up, get motivated, go to the gym if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford it. And then, focus. And that's the thing is that if one area of your focus is out of whack, I think it can certainly affect the others. I agree with that wholly. And I think, Josh, where we're heading, levels of anxiety related to people's finances will take on a whole new level of significance, because the road that I see us going down is one of ultimately spiked interest rates.
Mhm.
And as higher interest rates permeate their way through the system, and again, I don't think it'll be at the hands of the Federal Reserve. I think it'll be at the hands of the rest of the world, shedding the dollar as the singular solo world reserve currency. And as that happens, as interest rates spike, traditional investments, stocks, bonds, and real estate are inversely correlated to that moment.
Mhm.
And so if you're not prepared or in the right position to be able to withstand something like this, even people who think they're in a good position right now, as rates rise, it could dramatically affect the traditional 60-40 allocation, the traditional US portfolio is right in the crosshairs of this type of event. And so, yeah, I think it's really important. And I want people to understand that as we kick this off, that when I talk about gold and silver, it's in the perspective of it being wealth, 5,000-year-old wealth. Just as a side note, and maybe it will help people understand as a springboard into where we're going here. I started this company with my father when I was 19 years old. I went to the University of Minnesota with a hope of playing baseball, and tore up my knee my freshman year, and started a company with my dad when I was 19 years old. And he said to me, Andy, there's going to be one rule and only one rule, and that is you'll buy something every 2 weeks. And I said, well, shit, if that's the only rule, I can roll with that. That's not a problem. He said that rule is you're going to buy something every 2 weeks, no matter what. No big deal. I've owned the company now for over 20 years. He's been retired, but I've honored my word to him, and I've accumulated something every 2 weeks without fail, never missing for 33 years. And I say this to you so you understand, to me, when we talk about gold and silver, it is not an investment. It is wealth, period. That has outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, and is still immutable wealth. And so when we talk about building our financial pyramid of sorts, to me, gold and silver are not an investment. They are the foundation of everything else that we do with our money. They are, in my case, it is my wealth. And if you own enough of it, you'll be wealthy. But that's not the reason to own it. And I think it's really important as we move further here today, just for that to be understood, that I'm not here to talk about gold and silver as being an investment. It's money. And it's money that I hope I never need to use, ironically. But that could mean maybe there's a heck of an opportunity. It's not just for an emergency. A lot of people look at it, well, if the sky falls, you got gold and silver. Sure, that's good. But there are opportunities too in the environment that I see where rates take a toll on traditional assets. And if I do need to use it, I'm darn glad I have it, whether it be an emergency or an opportunity. If not, I give it to my kids. And I know that in the year 3000, when my great grandchildren are using the coins that were passed down to them, that it will be wealth. And long after the dollar bills in your and my wallet are hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian as an example of what was, gold and silver, just like they have been for 5,000 plus years, will still be wealth. And that's the position that I like to start from as we discuss why gold, why silver, and how does it fit into your health, whether it be financial health, mental health, or physical health. It's all intertwined. I completely and totally agree. And if you look at it this way, less an investment and more a foundation of wealth, I think it's easier to understand where we're going to go with this.
Yeah, that's a great introduction into that. And we're going to dive deeper into that as we move along today. I want to just for the listeners, I want to roll off some numbers here and stats that might open some people's eyes to this. And Andy, you mentioned, anxiety is on the rise and
Right,
depression, right? This is all health related.
right,
And a lot of it is stemming from the finance sector. So again, we're blending the two worlds.
right.
So nearly 50% of Americans would not be able to pay for a $400 emergency expense right now. I'm sure you've
Yep,
heard that. The
yep,
top 0.1% are worth about the same as the bottom 90%.
yep.
Okay. The median net worth of a family in the US is 121,000. The net worth of someone in the top 1% is 11 million. Okay. And if you don't know what your net worth is and you're listening to this, go figure it out. Okay. Inflation has rose more than 3,000% since 1910. $1 in 1910 now has the purchasing power of $31 in today's value. The poor and the middle class keep getting poorer while the rich keeps getting richer. There's no financial education in schools, grade school, or college, none. And we're told our primary home is the best investment and we should invest all our savings into a 401k, don't think about money, and hope to retire by age 65. And lastly, in the last 3 years, more money has been printed as compared to the entire time period prior.
Yeah,
So,
I'll add a few more to those. More than 30% of all American workers made less than $20,000 last year. More than 41% of all American workers made less than $30,000 last year. More than 52% of all Americans made less than $40,000 last year. And more than 62% of all American workers made less than $50,000 last year. That's from the Social Security Administration. At one time, America had the largest and most prosperous middle class in the world. And that was a great thing. That's changing right now. The middle class is being eviscerated, and inflation certainly is taking a toll. When you talk about what money was, there's President Roosevelt, and he confiscated gold in 1933 with his executive order. This $20 gold coin and this $20 gold note. Now, this is worth more because down here it says payable to the bearer on demand in gold coin. That's what they used to say. They were interchangeable. You could switch a $20 gold coin with a $20 gold certificate. And so it's worth a little bit more, but we're going to pretend that this is just a regular $20 bill for a minute, just to make the analogy. But if your grandfather or great grandfather left you a box, two boxes, one had $10,000 with the $20 gold coins. This is an ounce of gold. It's 0.9765 of an ounce. For all intent and purposes, it's an ounce. And this being $20. Now, these certificates are worth more now because they're rare, but let's just pretend it's a $20 gold, a $20 bill to make the point. So your grandfather leaves 500 of these in a box for you and 500 of these in a box for you. And if you go back to 1900, that $20 gold coin would have bought you a suit, a tie, an overcoat, shoes, the whole 9 yards, right? And because $20 in 1900 was an awful lot of money. Today, 1,800 bucks, an ounce of gold will buy you that exact same thing. The gold has retained its purchasing power. You open up that box that grandfather left you, and you have 500 $20 gold coins at $1,800 a piece. You nearly have $1 million. But the 500 $20 bills, 10,000 bucks. Yeah, it's going to be nice to have 10 grand from grandpa, but what does that tell you has happened to the value of money since gold was stripped out of it? And it's you can go to 1964 and look at the dimes and quarters that were part of our money supply prior to 1965, 64 and earlier. Dimes, quarters, and half dollars were 90% silver by weight. The melt value today, let me just do a quick calculation. The melt value of pre-65 silver right now, with silver at, call it $24. It's really close to it. 24 times So right now, a dollar's worth of pre-65 dimes and quarters, any or half dollars, just the melt value alone is worth $17.50 roughly.
Wow.
So each dollar, and let's divide that by 10. Each dime has a melt value of $1.71, right? So you can see just since 1965, the dollar, since we pulled silver out of it, has lost 17 times its value, whereas the silver would have maintained its value because it's real money. The actual currency has lost 17 times its value just since 1965. So when we talk about what gold and silver are, and this is what I was getting at the very beginning, Josh, is that it's wealth, it's money. Mm-hmm. Currency is what we spend right now. But back then, when this and this were interchangeable, this was money because this was backed by this. You could not print more of these than you had of these, backing the system. This was a tether, right? This was a governor, if you will. No, you can't print more because we got to dig more of this out of the ground. What this was proof that this was dug out of the ground. It was proof of work rather than the immoral ability of the Federal Reserve to go bang on a keystroke and print gazillions of dollars to buy U.S. treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, which decrease interest rates, which create an illusion of prosperity for the last several years. And you made a point that in the last 3 years, more money was created in the last 3 years than in the entire history of the United States prior to it. That is true. So when you add the massive money creation to the suppression of interest rates, what you get is a massive distortion in asset prices, where your house in upstate New York or my house in Florida can gain 200-300% in 3 years, where houses have doubled or tripled. Now that's changing as rates have risen. Where crypto accounts can go up tenfold, where equity accounts can go 2, 3, 4-fold in a year or 2 or 3. That's not how markets work. And this is distortions created through suppression of interest rates and massive injection of money into the system, which is creating a big problem, because when you start up here with distorted asset prices and then you see a correction, you have a real big problem at hand. Because look, interest rates and asset prices have to find an equilibrium. And if you have really, really low interest rates like we've had for years, it incentivizes people to speculate. It incentivizes people to take on more debt, not just people, corporations, everyone. If you expect interest rates to stay low, you can take on more debt. And if interest rates are really low, like 0% car loans for 72 months, you can go buy a bigger car than you could afford or buy a bigger house. I moved down here to Florida a year and a half ago. A 30-year jumbo mortgage was 3%. Today it's 7.5%.
Wow.
So that means the cost of money has over doubled in a year and a half. And so when these loans reset, if a lot of people bought the ARMs or the adjustable rate loans, it's a big, big, big problem. And when you talk about the potential for real issues, it stems from the fact that we have suppressed and manipulated reality for so long that the distortion in asset prices is a powder keg waiting to blow.
And that's because we've been printing money out of thin air, not backed by gold. So again, our listeners are most of them are pretty beginner level with this finance. And so in 1971, the dollar came off the gold standard, okay?
Correct.
Meaning that it's backed by nothing. It's fiat currency.
Correct.
And so this gives the Federal Reserve permission to just print, devaluing the dollar, correct?
That's right. And so at the end of World War II, the Allies met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to anoint the dollar the world reserve currency, taking over for the pound sterling. And at that point, the U.S. government said to the world, here's what we'll do. You take our dollars, because prior to that, prior to 1971 anyways, because of the Bretton Woods Agreement, everyone owned dollars. And the reason is that what we said to the world is, you take our dollars, and what we will promise you is that if you ever want to exchange it for gold, we will send you gold, governments, not people. We will send you gold at $35 an ounce fixed rate. Not only that, most of the world gave us their gold because of it, because they're sitting on gold. And if you're in Europe after 2 world wars, you're like, you know what? Take my gold. It's safe over there. You guys are the allies. You're going to hold the gold, and I can always exchange it for 35 bucks an ounce. But even better than that, I'll sell you my gold, US. You'll pay me 35 an ounce. I'll reinvest it in your treasuries, which will help you and help me, because I'll get a return on my gold that's sitting in a vault collecting nothing but dust. So not only do we not have to store it anymore and worry about the security, we can actually earn a return on it, and we can always exchange it back at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And that was true until 1971, as you mentioned, when President de Gaulle from France said, looks like they are printing more dollars than they have gold behind it to fund their guns and butter and their Vietnam War. So let's send warships over to New York Harbor filled with dollar bills and demand gold back. And we gave it to them. But it bled down the gold at the Treasury so precipitously that Nixon said, we're going to temporarily close the gold window. Well, it's never reopened. At that point, the dollar was fiat backed by nothing. You are correct. And so when you talk about a currency backed by nothing, the ability of a government to print, it goes all the way back to Roman times, to the beginning of times. When you give a government the choice of austerity or tough decisions or printing, they'll always err on the side of printing, because it's a whole hell of a lot easier to print your way out of a problem, so you think, than it is to make the tough choices and pull back entitlements, pull back things that are, make politicians unpopular, if you will. And that's where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, that's very well said, Andy. So there might be people listening that don't know what causes inflation, or even what inflation is, because we keep going back to, we're printing money, it's backed by nothing. There might be some people listening to say, like, what's so bad about that, right? So can you explain what inflation is, and how that affects everyone?
I mean, inflation is nothing but an increase in the money supply. Now, when you add in a decrease in production, it exacerbates it, and that's exactly what we've seen over the last several years, where people have paid to not be productive, paid to stay home, given money to eat bonbons and play video games on their couch, and not be productive, while it massively increasing the money supply. And what that does is it's counterfeiting all of the other dollars that are in circulation. It's stealing from their wealth. Mm-hmm. The more that you create, the less the dollars in circulation are worth. And plain and simply, inflation is an increase in the money supply. And that's exactly what we've seen. Massive, massive money creation. So you have more money chasing less stuff, because not only were people paid to not create stuff, the amount of money that was created is so truly extraordinary that you have more money chasing the fewer goods and services out there, so the prices rise as more money is chasing it. And that's why we've seen such massive inflation. And it's interesting, it's not even interesting, it's by design, that the way that the US government calculates inflation is massively understated. Mm-hmm. So since 1980, they've stripped out much of the inflated assets or items that are inflated, such as food, energy, and housing. So they cite something called the core CPI, which excludes food, energy, and housing, because obviously none of us need to eat. Living up in New York, you don't need to heat your house in January and December. I mean, who needs that? Down here in Florida, I don't need AC. And, you don't need to live anywhere either, by the way. You can, live in a tent, if you will, and heat your tent with a fire. That's kind of what they're saying, because the measurements of inflation strip out food, energy, and housing. There's a guy named John Williams, a wonderful man. I've met him many times. And all he does, his website is called shadowstats.com. And all John does is calculate inflation by the way it used to be calculated prior to 1980, before they stripped out the things that are inflated in order to fit their agenda. So in other words, governments around the world have a vested interest in printing as much money as possible. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of time, but they also don't want people to know it. And they do that by blurring the statistics and lying about the numbers. so that they can print their way to prosperity, right? And if that were really true, Weimar Republic would still be the richest nation on earth, as would Zimbabwe. And so when you talk about what inflation is, it's stealing from the wealth in or the dollars that are in circulation already. And it's not a good thing. And look, bottom line is simply this. We are told to believe right now that the CPI, even after its latest drop, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 7% or whatnot. Inflation. Well, if you add in the real numbers, if you look at the way they used to be calculated, we're north of 16% inflation right now, even with the pullback. And so that's a really big problem, especially when you talk about interest rates at 3 or 4% on the 10-year treasury. So you buy a 10-year treasury paying you 3 or 4% against inflation at 16%, real inflation. Even if you use the CPI numbers, call it 7%. So you have 7% inflation with a 3% bond yield, you're negative 4% return. It's a whole thing. Everything is screwed up right now because of the massive inflation and the suppression of interest rates. What we have is really some sort of a dystopian world where it's very difficult to find real values. Where should inflation be? Where should interest rates be? And where should asset prices be? And when you have a government that has manipulated all of this, it creates all of these inequities, all of these misallocations of capital and resource, and these distortions that as inflation rises will only really put a spotlight on these distortions as they begin to break. And I think that's the path that we're on right now.
Yeah, and inflation, I've read, is the largest hidden tax on people, right, Andy?
100%, 100%. It is a insidious hidden tax on people, and lately it hasn't been so hidden. When you look at a Fed who says we want a mandate of 2% inflation, well, why not negative inflation? Why not zero inflation? Because the lower the rate of inflation, the higher the standard of living. And so why is it that they need to have a 2% rate of inflation? The whole thing is just ludicrous to me. So yes, the higher the rate of inflation, it is in essence a tax. At 2%, every year the dollar loses 2%. Now, we haven't been able to hit that number for a while, so it's at much higher than that. But if you use something called the rule of 70 seconds, right? So if you have 7% inflation and you divide that into 72, that tells you how long before your principal doubles. Well, in this case, at 7% inflation in 10.2 years, the value of your dollar is cut in half.
Wow. And that is huge for people listening. That is
right. And that's any interest rate that you have. If that's why it's no coincidence that credit cards typically start at 18% interest. What's 18 times 4? 72. If you just pay your minimum monthly balance, never touching your principal, in 4 years, your principal doubles.
Wow.
Because that's the rule of 70 seconds. It's mathematical law. So yeah, it becomes much more stark. Now look at it the other way around. Let's say we had 10% interest rates, right? In 7 years, your principal doubles. So if you had 10% interest rates, people would buy, treasuries with safety. And with inflation below it, you're actually ahead. But instead, we have high inflation and low interest rates, which means even buying things that are supposedly safe, like a bond portfolio, you are losing to inflation every year. It's a negative real return. We're in a very bad place right now where, because of all the manipulations, you have all of these distortions that will work themselves out, but there will be a good deal of pain in order to work your way through the system. You could argue that they should have just let everything fail and blow up in 08.
Yep.
And instead they came in and screwed with it and cranked up the money supply. Let me explain what I mean by that. In 2008, it was the great financial crisis. The Federal Reserve had a balance sheet at that time of $800 billion. Right now it's near $9 trillion. And the only thing that the Fed can buy in order to enact monetary policy would be U.S. treasuries and mortgage-backed securities like Fannie and Freddie. But both of those items, if you buy treasuries or if you buy mortgage-backed securities, the act of buying those decreases the interest rates in the prevailing economy, lowers the interest rates in the housing market, lowers the interest rates on the treasury market. So you go in and you create money, you buy all of these treasuries, you buy all of these mortgage-backed securities, you blow up your balance sheet from 800 billion to 9 trillion, but the act of buying all that stuff crushes interest rates, which then makes people say, well, geez, I can go buy that new Porsche that I wanted. I know I can't really afford it, but I can get 0% interest rates for 72 months. What the hell? Let's do it. Or I can buy that house. I was going to buy one for 300,000, but I can buy it for 600,000 because rates are so low. It's the same thing until it's not. And until you lose your job in a slowdown in the economy or whatever it may be. But that manipulation of interest rates, it creates an incentive to speculate and to take on more debt than you otherwise could, creating these distortions in asset prices and where they're just make-believe. And it's because interest rates are make-believe. When you suppress interest rates the way the Federal Reserve did, that was done specifically for a reason. You buy $8 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities and treasuries, you're going to crush the interest rate market and you're going to blow up the value of housing market and the stock market. Or how about the fact that a hedge fund who doesn't need a loan, who's got billions of dollars behind it, can take out a loan for a couple $100 million at 1%, plug it into real estate investment trusts, into cryptocurrencies and stocks, crush the market way up, right? Blow it up with all the money poured into it, pay off that loan with no problem at all, make huge bonuses, make huge amounts of money in your portfolios for your shareholders, and it's all make-believe because the cost of money was nothing. And so by borrowing that money at nothing with no problem paying it back and plowing it into assets, you have created distortions in asset prices that are make-believe. And now you see interest rates rising and the cost of money becomes much more. And just as bullish as it was for low interest rates and easy money, it will be the opposite bearish nightmare when you pull all of that liquidity back. Now, I'm going to say something that's a little bit over people's head right now, probably based upon what you said, but it will hopefully drive the point home. There's something called the reverse repo market. Don't even worry about what that means, but it's this. Banks have money, and the banks can either lend it to you and I for a credit card, with a credit card or a home equity loan or a mortgage or a car payment, a car loan. Any of these things, they can lend it into the system, right? And they make a big return. Or they can give it to the Federal Reserve in a reserve account, which is called the overnight repo market, where they're going to get 4% guaranteed with safety because they're giving it to the Fed. So imagine you're the Federal Reserve, Josh. I'm going to give it to you overnight. You're going to pay me 4% and give it back. We'll do this every single day instead of lending it to me for a home equity loan, because I may go bankrupt. And the banks don't really like the economy out there because of all of these distortions. The reverse repo market has over $2 trillion in it right now because the banks, they're scared shitless. Pardon my French. They don't want to lend it out into the economy because of the prevailing scary risks in this economy that will manifest themselves as rates continue to rise, as things continue to unfold. Instead, they'd rather give it to you, the safe Federal Reserve, who's going to guard it with safety, pay me a nice return, and I don't care if I'm leaving money on the table because Joe Sixpack here has a much greater chance of defaulting on that loan, and the Federal Reserve has zero chance of that. And that's why you see so much money in this reverse repo market. It's the smart money, the bank's way of saying, this economy is smoke and mirrors. This is a house of cards. I'd rather give it to the Fed with no risk than make twice my return and end up with a good number of defaults on my balance sheet.
Yeah, I want to go farther into that. That's very interesting that you said the banks are so scared right now. Now there's something called fractional reserve banking, right? Yep. When I read this not too long ago, it absolutely blew my mind. I was one that thought that the banks had these vaults, right, with all of my money in it and everyone else's money. So if they had $1 million in deposits, they had $1 million in a vault. That's not the case. It's actually not even close to the case. And so can you explain to listeners what fractional reserve banking is?
It was originally, I believe, 10 cents on the dollar. If you deposit $1,000 into the bank, that gives the bank the ability to make a loan for $100,000.
Yes, and so we're stopped there so people can grasp that. So your 10,000 went in, and then 100,000 went out. Okay.
And that 100,000 is how, this is the way that money is created in the United States. So let's stop for 1 second. You come back to your thought, but just so you people know, the biggest reason the Federal Reserve wants a digital currency is not so that they can keep their thumb on you because you lost 20 bucks in a game of poker to your buddies, or you paid your babysitter in cash, or whatever it may be. You went and bought, cigarettes and vodka at the liquor store, and they know what you're doing, and maybe they don't think that's healthy. So whatever it is, there are reasons people think, oh, they're going to spy on us. Well, that's part of it. But the biggest reason is that the only way money is created, remember going back to the reserve repo argument, if the Federal Reserve creates a bond, creates money to buy a bond, they buy the bonds not from the Treasury, that's illegal, they buy them from the banks who hold the bonds. And the banks are obliged to sell the bonds to the Fed if they come calling. Now, the banks have two options with that money. They either lend it out to you, or they give it back to the Fed in a reserve account. Those are the only two things that they can do. So when you talk about how money is created not by the Federal Reserve creating money and buying bonds, because if the banks don't lend it out into the system, it goes right back to the Fed. It never gets out. What they did by creating the money to buy the bonds is lower interest rates, because they bought the bonds in the market, which then crushes interest rates. But the only way that money gets out into the system, which creates inflation and which creates money supply increase, is by the banks lending it out. That is how it works. And so if you look at it from that perspective, when you deposit money into the bank and the bank then lends it to you, or creates money and can lend it out, that's the fractional reserve system. That's how money is created. When the bank extends to you a home equity loan, a car payment, a car loan, gives you a credit card. These are all extensions of credit, and that is money creation that comes out of nowhere. Boom. Your $1,000 became $100,000 in loans to other people, and that $100,000 just came out of nowhere. And that's how the money supply increases.
And that's a great explanation. And this is how a run on a bank, this is how banks go under and cause mass chaos, right?
Well,
so if all of us went to the bank today and said, we want our money, we wouldn't get it.
Not even a fraction of it. In fact, the 10% factor used in fractional reserve is much less than the banks actually had to ever keep. I think the number used to be 4% or so in reserves they had to keep. And during COVID, they relinquished all the reserve requirements. Now, I don't know if they've ever reenacted them. I should figure that out. But the bottom line is that just about any bank you go to, if they have 4 or 5% of cash on hand, you'll be fortunate. So there is no question at all that the banks are woefully undercapitalized in comparison to their obligations. So when you talk about a central bank digital currency, the second in charge at the Federal Reserve, her name is Lael Brainerd. I thought she was going to be appointed the new Fed chairman because Powell was originally with Trump, and I thought they were going to get rid of him, but they kept him on and made her vice chair. And Lael Brainerd's whole doctrine that she wrote about in order to be considered for the Fed position is one of modern monetary theory, getting rid of the commercial banks and going straight from the Federal Reserve digital currency to the public. Now, what does that mean? That means right here is my phone, and if the Fed wants to stimulate the economy, oh shoot, they just gave me $5,000. I got to go spend it, though. It says it disappears in 30 days because I need to spend it before the end of the Christmas holidays to spur the economic stimulation into the economy, or maybe, oh crap, there's too much inflation. If they just took $5,000 out of my account. This is what she says. She says, if we need to create inflation, we'll give money to the public. And even though it's not popular, if we need to quell inflation, we will pull money from people's accounts. This is what she's saying, getting rid of the commercial banks. Why? Because the Federal Reserve does not like the fact that the banks would rather put $2 trillion into the reverse repo market with safety and does not stimulate the economy than put it out there. So the Fed says, how about we get rid of the banks and we just give money to the public and take it from the public as needed? In other words, the ability to enact monetary policy directly to the public instead of the way the system is now, go through the commercial bank lending process. So this is the bigger reason why the Fed wants a digital currency. It's less the erosion of privacy that maybe the government and the IRS like, more the ability to pull the levers directly to the end user without having it to be lent into existence. And you can see the banks are saying, screw it, I'm going to give it to the Fed and make 4% with no risk, then give it to Josh so he can build another gym and he'll pay me 7%. I'll leave that 3% on the table because you know what? He may fail, but the Fed, they'll always give us our money back. And that's really the issue with the system that we have right now.
And the Fed's able to continually pay that back and not default because they can print more.
There you go.
And then, inflation goes up.
This is the privilege of being the world reserve currency. Or you could look at it from everyone else's perspective and say, those sons of bitches, look what they're able to do. Why can't we do that? They have the printing press. Yeah. We don't. They just print their way to prosperity. And it's created a whole lot of aggravation and angst around the world where we are seeing this coalition of countries around the world all join together against the U.S. hegemony, against the U.S. hypocrisy, against this type of I guess you could call it an unfair advantage that we've enjoyed since 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window, because at that point we became backed by nothing but the ability to print and to throw you in jail for not paying your taxes and to go and bomb you if you try and you know deviate from this, the way Saddam Hussein wanting to sell oil for gold or for euro or Gaddafi. But things are changing around the globe now, and I think we have kind of reached the end of our rope and the ability to push the world around. And if you look at what's happening with the BRICS nations and this massive gathering of countries, which seem to be moving rapidly against the Western hegemony, it begs the question: Are we in the ninth inning of this ball game, or is there still time to go? And I would argue we're closer to the ninth inning than we are to the first. And what happens as a result? Well, that remains to be seen.
Well, and as a result, the poor and the middle class are just getting crippled by inflation, right? And so they're getting poorer by the day, and they're having to rely on more social welfare programs, which is Fed related. That means they're printing money again to pay for the social welfare programs to help the people that were crippled by inflation, but printing more money creates more inflation, right? It's just a vicious cycle.
Yep.
And, going back quickly to the run on the bank, during, the pandemic, I did go to the bank and I withdrew, not a large amount, but some money, right, to have at home. And they had a problem with that. And they had to get a manager, and they tried to talk me out of taking it. And they, it wasn't a good meeting. And I did finally end up getting it. And, it was funny, over the next 6 months, there was a handful of clients at the gym that told me the same thing. The bank didn't want to give them their own money. And it goes back to what we just talked about, the fractional reserve banking. It's not there, right? And then there's a huge problem when they draw down on that 4 or that 10% reserve sitting there, right? That's like a red zone for them. That's not a peace of mind for me.
No, not at all. And this is why you have to wonder, is it worth it to have your money in a bank that is woefully undercapitalized, that is paying you next to nothing in return, and that is part of a very systemic, incestuous system where if one goes, does it pull down 6 others? They're all tied together. And, you have to ask yourself, is the return commensurate with the risk? And I would argue in many cases in the banking system, it's not. Yep. Most people don't understand the concept of bail-in. They probably never heard of it. Or gating, money market gating. Probably never heard of that. In 2008, when the banks went under, everyone remembers that all us taxpayers bailed out these idiot banks who basically went to Vegas and put all their money on red, and black came up, right? And oh crap, well, the taxpayers, everyone in the casino will pay for our screw up, right? And that's pretty much what happened. Well, they made that act illegal moving forward. You can't do that anymore. Instead, they enacted what's called bail-in legislation. That was put into law in 2009. What does that mean? That means it's like bankruptcy protection. Let's use you as an example, Josh. Let's say you have, and I don't know the number they'll use. Maybe it's anything over $100,000. I think that's what they did with Cyprus when they bailed in the accounts in Cyprus. Or maybe it's the 250 scam FDIC insurance, which is woefully undercapitalized. But let's just pretend you have $400,000 in your bank account. And I'm just going to use this number. And anything over 250 is not insured. So let's say the bank goes under. The way the laws are right now, FDIC would cover your 250, but that 150 extra, that's gone. And that's going into a pool. And that pool will, anyone who's got money over the 250 limit, all of it goes into a pool. Maybe someone has $1 million in there. So 750 goes into the pool. And all of that money goes into the pool, and then it makes the bank whole. And then whatever is left is passed back out on a pro rata fashion. The guy who put in 3 times as much as you gets 3 times much back than you do, or more. But the point is, it's bail-in legislation. The taxpayer will not bail out the banks anymore. Those of us who are in with the banks are now unsecured creditors of the bank. That's the way the law reads, that if the bank goes under, we bail out the bank, not the taxpayer. And number 2, gating, money market gating. People will be like, well, I'm in a money market, I'm safe, I'm not in the bank. No, you're pretty well screwed, because in 2009, when this happened also, many of the banks, or many of the money market funds were invested with Lehman Brothers in 2008. When Lehman went down, it started to blow up the money markets. It's called breaking the buck. And they imposed legislation where everyone was trying to pull out. When that happens, you don't even get your principal back. So now there's money market gating. That means you're stuck. Can't get out. Let me out. Can't get out. Sorry, until things calm down, then we'll let you out. By then, you may have already, been screwed. So they are putting the pieces in place to make it very difficult if we see problems that I think are bound to happen. So this is the reason to own precious metals. It's for these types of risks that are inherent to a system that has been manipulated ridiculously for the last several years. And instead of letting Mother Nature do what Mother Nature should have done, like a forest fire that cleans the forest, and then several years later you come back and, wow, it looks beautiful here. That's what should have happened in 2008. Instead, what they did, they just burned down more of the forest so that we can keep on walking through without tripping over the branches. But Mother Nature, in the end, always gets her way. And we're pissing her off so much that when it does correct, because of all of these distortions that we have created, it's going to be bad for a lot of people who think they're wealthy in traditional assets until rates spike because the world dumps dollars in favor of a new currency backed by the BRICS nations, which will be commoditized, as we've just been told by the Russian finance minister. And Saudi Arabia is now joining the BRICS nations. And for those people who don't understand, let's talk about something. I don't mean to divert too much, but it's very important. What makes the dollar the world reserve currency? Now, you listened to an interview I did with Robert Kiyoski, so you know the answer to this question, but most people don't. And we talked about Nixon closing the gold window in 71, which made the dollar backed by nothing. But what makes it the world reserve currency in that case? Well, 3 years later, Henry Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia and struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom. We're going to protect you. No one's ever going to mess with you, ever. We got your back. We're going to fill your country with sophisticated weaponry. We're going to teach you how to use it. And we got your back if anyone messes with you militarily. Before that, you're going to denominate oil, you and OPEC, in dollars globally. And since 1974, every country on the planet has had to own dollars because of this. Because OPEC and Saudi Arabia said, okay, cool. All oil sales will be in dollars, period.
Wow.
So yes. Every country out there has had to own dollars. And I remember, prior to 71, every country had dollars. It was the Bretton Woods Agreement. So it just made sense well, let's just do it as the petrodollar because everyone's got dollars anyway. So now this synthetic demand for the dollar has been created because of OPEC and Saudi Arabia's willingness to only sell oil for dollars for protection, like a bodyguard fee, so to speak. Well, those days are coming to an end rapidly. And Saudi Arabia is now being protected by Russia. At the same time, they signed military agreements and have just agreed to join the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and about 150 other countries that are joining. All 13 of the OPEC producing countries are on the Chinese Belt Road and Rail Initiative. And if you guys out there don't know what this is, you must Google Chinese Belt Road and Rail Initiative. It is the largest infrastructure project ever attempted in human history, connecting Asia, Africa, Europe, and South America. And it represents, when you put all these countries together, north of 70% of human population and 45% of global GDP. And the US is not part of it.
Ooh.
And all it would take would be Saudi Arabia and OPEC to say, hey, thanks for the memories, you guys. Really, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for having our back. But we've decided we are joining the BRICS nations with all of our other OPEC producing brothers and sisters. And we're being protected now by Russia and China and India and all of the countries that are joining. We've decided to open up oil sales to a multitude of other currencies, or God help us all if they say just the new BRICS currency. But all of those countries on the planet that have had to own dollars since 1974 will say, here, take them back. Don't want them.
Wow.
And if you ever saw the movie Trading Places, where he says, sell, Mortimer, sell, because the market's collapsing. And the dollar market would collapse because everyone dumps them because they don't need to own them anymore. They can use whatever currency they want to buy oil, or maybe they all are going to buy the new BRICS currency. Whatever it is, the dollar gets dumped. And the dollar collapses, interest rates spike, stocks, bonds, and real estate collapse. That is the great reset that Klaus Schwab talks about. This is what makes me most concerned. This is what keeps me up at night. And the sad thing is most people have no idea what's on the horizon. If I were going to do anything to figure out what's going on, I would research the BRICS nations. I would research the Belt Road Initiative. I would research the petrodollar, or the demise of the petrodollar, and the ramifications of what happens if this indeed happens. And it looks overwhelmingly so that it is already on a very, very expedited path to happening. It is what I've been talking about for over 3 years. I was the only one talking about this in 2019, the only one, and in 2020, and in 2021, and now everyone's talking about it. Go back and look at any of the videos I've done since 2019, and I show you a progression of events, starting with probably the most important event of my career that nobody knows about, and that is in April of 2019, the Bank of International Settlements reclassified gold as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset. Now, let me say that one more time slowly. At the end of World War II, the dollar was anointed the only Tier 1 reserve asset. It means riskless. What does that mean? That means, Josh, I lend you $1 million to go open up a new gym, but you give me a briefcase full of $1 million in $100 bills. That's Tier 1 to me. That's riskless. I don't care if you don't pay my loan back. I got your briefcase, right? That's riskless. That's what the dollar has been since the end of World War II. The only Tier 1 reserve asset in the world, and US Treasuries. That's it. Riskless collateral. In April of 2019, the Bank of International Settlements, very quietly, they said, oh, by the way, now gold is the only other Tier 1 asset. So when you see all of these countries, in particular the BRICS nations, loading up on gold, the only Tier 1 asset in the world next to US dollars, and the Russian finance minister saying, by the way, we're going to peg this new BRICS currency to commodities. What he's saying is it's going to be a gold-backed currency. And when that happens, when, as Zoltan Pozsar, who used to work for the New York Federal Reserve, he's the repo market expert, he came out and said, we are now entering a new era, call it Bretton Woods 3, an era based upon commodities rather than debt instruments. Think our debt instruments, where you have the fractional reserve system, where you have the ability to print money out of thin air and create illusions of wealth and prosperity, distortions in asset prices, versus this new system, which will be pegged to commodities. And how will they show the world that? Well, this Belt Road Initiative has all been funded or settling on the new Chinese digital yuan for the last 3 years, including they rolled it out at the Beijing Winter Olympics. So you have a 3-year successful beta test of over $25 billion in successful transactions on the new digital yuan. How about they peg this technology or use this technology as the rails for the new BRICS currency, where all of these countries that are joining the BRICS will pledge gold to a distributed ledger for the whole world to see on this new technology. Every country pegged gold. There they are. It's the rallying cry against this Western hegemony, the sanctions, the manipulation, the hypocrisy.
Yep.
But what makes it work, the glue, is the gold peg. Now it's tier 1, riskless, peg to the new ledger. Bang. All of the countries peg, they all have equal footing at the table. They all have equal say. There is no one country dominating the narrative like the US with the United Nations. This is every country gets equal say, and you have a distributed ledger technology for the whole world to see the immutability and the veracity of it. And it's this close away. This is the problem. The rest of it is smoke and mirrors. If the world decides the dollar is no longer the singular world reserve currency, you don't need it to buy oil anymore. It will be a religious experience in this country, because when the dollar collapses, the byproduct of that inflation is spiked interest rates to the moon, which then blows up all the asset prices, stocks, bonds, and real estate, inversely correlated, stemming from or coming from all-time high valuations because of 3 years worth of ridiculous and irresponsible money printing and 15 years worth of suppression of interest rates. It's just a powder keg waiting.
So question. So when the dollar collapses, you said stocks, bonds, real estates, they decrease in their value, right? Their price. Now that's saying it's decreasing in the value of dollars because the dollar has collapsed. Now, I had told you, we own a large piece of land. I like to think of as land as a store of wealth, right? So if that happens, or when that happens, the dollar collapses and real estate prices collapse here in the United States because they're linked to the dollar, there's still an inherent store of wealth with owning that land.
Of course there is.
It may be in a different currency or in how much gold it could be worth, right? Am I thinking of that the right way, Andy?
Well, you are, but and it's true. People think of things only in terms of dollars, and so you have to separate that for a moment. But more realistically, when the dollar collapses, when the dollar falls because it's being dumped, you have to raise interest rates commensurate to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. And so when interest rates rise, fewer and fewer people have the wherewithal to borrow money at those high interest rates to buy the land. So the land decreases because there's no demand. It's the same thing we've been talking about with inflation. You have more money chasing fewer items. So you have more demand and less items so that the prices rise. Well, if you have less demand, then the prices fall because people can't afford it, right? So in an environment where you have 0% interest rates and a 30-year mortgage at 3% and everyone's being pummeled with money, that land, I'll take it, no, he'll take it, no, I'll take it, no, I'll take it, no, and the price goes up. Yep. But when no one has money, anyone want this? Anyone? How about I'll cut it in half price on sale, more. No one can afford it. So when you have everyone with no risk in borrowing or no with the ability to borrow money with no problem, with no governor on the interest rates, where interest rates are so low that, hey, I'll buy it. I got no risk. I can afford it. The maintenance on it is nothing. But now the cost of money just went up by double over. So how the hell do you pay for it? Who's got the money to pay for it? What if rates go higher again? Now, fewer and fewer people have cash on hand to pay for it. In other words, they aren't able to finance it. And all of I mean, look, those numbers that you gave at the onset, where, just a few people, 40% of the country doesn't have $500 to pay for a flat tire or a root canal. Who's got the money to buy a $500,000 parcel of land as rates rise? So that's why interest rates are inversely related to asset prices, because it's the cost of money. Unless you have money unencumbered that you can just, okay, I'll pay you $3 million for your land right now. I don't need a loan from the bank. Done. But how many people can do that? And that's really why interest rates and real estate prices are inversely correlated. You have low interest rates and easy money, everyone can afford it. You have high interest rates, you're not going to be able to lend, you're not going to be able to borrow that money to pay for the house or the land because the rates are too high. So yes, they're all connected, but in this case, it's interest rates that are really the kicker here. And as the dollar falls, rates will rise.
And it's something, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm reading a really good book now on the Great Depression. And that's a reoccurring theme in this book was somewhat what you just said with no, like stocks, land, like everything's on sale.
Yes.
No one had the money to buy what was on sale. There was
now I'm glad you said that. So what is gold and silver in that environment? In that environment, when no one can perform because everyone is losing everything, you have counterparty risk where, you have a property, but no one can afford to pay the rent. So that's your counterparty risk. It's losing value because no one's paying you rent. And that is interestingly what happened here a few years ago where people got, this forebodance and they didn't have to pay. And the government said, no, you can't kick them out. You can't evict them. So what if you're the poor property owner who still has to pay maintenance taxes and, and all that kind of upkeep, and you're not getting any money. So what is gold and silver? They are two of the only assets in the world that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. There's no counterparty risk. And in that environment, gold and silver represent pure wealth without counterparty risk. And that's the key to it in this environment.
That makes a lot of sense. And they talk about that in the book, right? That the people that owned real estate then didn't have rental income coming in, but they still had all the overhead expenses, but they had no money to pay the expenses.
That's the problem.
They were literally in the Great Depression tearing down good buildings on land to reduce the taxes and overhead on that parcel because they didn't have the money to pay the overhead. And that's exactly what you were just describing. Wow.
My great-grandparents lost their farm in Williston, North Dakota in the Great Depression. They owed just a few $100s on the home. And then to make things worse, when the home was taken over by the bank, not too long after, they discovered oil in the shale oil properties there in Williston, North Dakota. And that's, just a little bit of debt in that environment can be catastrophic. And if you look at where we're heading right now, in my opinion, you have two outcomes. One is either hyperinflation, where the government just chooses to try and print their way out of this problem, or the greatest depression of all time. There really is no middle ground here, in my opinion. One way or the other, we're going to have a massive recession, depression, or hyperinflation. It just depends how it all plays out. I would be shocked if they're able to engineer some sort of a soft landing that sidesteps both outcomes.
So so that's a Y in the road. So let's take the one Y and quickly summarize this for people with hyperinflation. So we've already sort of beat that to death. So if that's the road we go, we keep printing money, inflation goes through the roof. How does someone get richer in times of inflation? What should they be buying?
Well, you buy assets.
Yes.
Right? I mean, assets feed you, liabilities eat you in that environment. Where, to your point, land, paid for home, precious metals, assets. The wealthy accumulate assets. That's the way you become wealthy, not in so much in dollars in your bank account, but in assets.
So this is why I asked this question, because this is a huge piece of, if we call it advice or just something for people to look into, is the wealthy, and this is why the income gap has become the way that it is, owns and purchases cash flow producing assets that appreciate with inflation. The poor and middle class, or people unable to invest, own dollars, and they own no assets. So when the purchasing power of the dollar goes down, their money is worth less and they can't buy as much with it, right? And therefore their net worth is essentially decreasing versus people that in times of hyperinflation or inflation, they're actually getting wealthier because their assets are appreciating. And I really want to beat that down into people because I would say 9 out of 10 adults don't understand that.
Yeah, and well, that's the world that we live in, where Keynesian economics are taught, where Keynesian economics is an expansion of the economy through debt, through taxation, through spending, whereas Austrian economics is through savings, investment, and reinvestment.
Mm-hmm.
It's the three little pigs, and the Keynesian is the straw house. The Austrian is the brick house, where you invest, you save, you invest, and you reinvest. And that's how you take that reinvestment and invest it in your business, in infrastructure, in capital paying assets. And that's really the way that the wealthy have built their foundation, of not through lending and borrowing, or borrowing and spending. It's through savings, investment, and reinvestment. You have to have savings in order to invest or reinvest the proceeds into cash generating things, instead of borrowing from the bank, the way that the Keynesian system is, enriching the bankers, borrowing from the bank, and hopefully being able to sell it to someone and then doing it all over again. And that borrowing from the bank, what does that do? Creates money, increases the money supply. And so this is the path that the bankers want us on, rather than the one of people who save, take their own savings and spend money to invest it, instead of borrowing it from the bank. Instead of building up the bank, you build up the infrastructure from the inside, and it's the brick, it's savings, and it's investment. Instead of it's all of this stuff has been borrowed at low interest rates, and now what? Oh, the bank's going to take it back. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're all screwed. Thank you very much. You're screwed, you're screwed, and you're screwed. Thank you. But the Austrian economist, the guy who's got, oh, no, I paid for that myself. There's no debt on it. I saved, I invested, I reinvested. This is the distinction. And there's no coincidence that this is why we're on the Keynesian-based system, because the bankers want us to be subservient and slaves to them forever. This is how they stay wealthy. This is how they've stayed wealthy for hundreds of years. And this is why we're on the path we're on.
It's a debt-driven society.
Yep.
Yep. So let's take the other fork in the road there. The depression, the full out collapse. How do people preserve wealth, grow wealth, survive? Because I know at this point an hour in, people are probably questioning a lot of things. What happens? I know obviously
that's why it's the same answer.
Yep.
And this is what people don't quite understand. Everyone thinks gold is great and silver is great, and an inflation protects you from the increase. It does, but it's even better in a deflation.
Yep.
Why? Because it is one of the only assets in the world that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. In a massive depression, no one can pay their bills. Counterparty risk up the yin yang. Companies go bankrupt because they're not getting paid for their work, or the landlord is going broke because no one can pay their rent. And in a depression, everyone fails. Businesses fail. Everything contracts. But not this gold coin I have. There's no counterparty risk there. And when I offer this gold coin to you, oh my God, I don't have to rely upon someone else to perform for me to have the wealth. So the misconception is that gold and silver perform best in inflation. I would argue they perform best in a deflation. They may look in a deflation, in a depression, everyone loses. It is he or she that loses least that wins in a deflation. And that's what gold and silver represent. No counterparty risk, no liability on that end. And so it enables you to lose least. Even though gold and silver may fall in value, they will fall less than those assets that are being defaulted upon, because inability of the counterparty to make good, because I just can't pay my damn bills because I got laid off from my job because my corporation failed, and I got all these bills because I borrowed money at 0% interest rates to buy my car for 72 months and to buy the bigger house than I really shouldn't have bought, but interest rates were so low I figured I'd do it. I'm effed. That's what happens there, and that's an awful scenario. And that's when the big money who has no debt comes in and buys assets on the penny, penny on the dollar. That's where the insidious part comes in. And that's why, again, the rich will accumulate assets and they'll buy the pennies on the dollar when the other people can't pay their bills and they just go to the bank.
So this is how we actually acquired, I'm just using this as an example, that land was a foreclosure. You know, so it was our benefit for having funds to do that. And obviously, you know, we were able to pay off that principal balance, but at a benefit to us, right? So I'm curious, I want to just a few questions with gold and silver investing. Are you like, do people, when they buy this, they're not actually having it like in a safe, or are they? Is it more of a ledger online? Because I'm new to that sector of investment. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're always best to hold it yourself if you can.
Okay.
I'd rather see people dig a hole in the ground and become a midnight gardener in their backyard, bury it, 3 feet down in a PVC pipe with rubber caps. If you bury it vertically 2.5 feet down, there's hardly a metal detector on the planet that will find it. I'd rather see you do that than put it in a safe deposit box. But yeah, put it in a safe, put it in some empty paint cans, splash some paint on the outside, throw it in your basement with your other half empty paint cans. No one's going to look through there. You have a better chance of being ripped off by the system than you do by a burglar looking for gold and silver if you hide it properly. You can put silver is a little bit different, but in a box this big, you could put $1 million worth of gold, and you can hide it pretty easily. And for those people who are a little more concerned about that, we have some of the best storage programs with Brinks in the world. We have worldwide exclusives from them in the way that we build and some of the facilities we have, and some of the things we have in those facilities make us the envy of the storage industry. We have Brinks locations in Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto, New York, Miami, Salt Lake City, and Los Angeles. So people want to store metal outside their home. We have a great place to do it. But here again, going back to the central theme, we've talked a lot about the removal of counterparty risk. Be your own bank, be your own vault, be your own insurance company, be your own retirement account, and hold it yourself. Don't tell anyone about it, but maybe one or two real close loved ones, and hide it really damn well. And I think you're best off doing that.
So your company, Miles Franklin, let's get into what you guys do. How, like, if I had $10,000 right now and I come to you, what's going to go on from there?
Well, that's, again, every person's situation is different.
Okay.
But we would right now say that the place to be right now is silver. It might be the most undervalued asset on the planet. Ultimately, when the music stops, I want to see people in gold because it was a tier 1 reclassified asset. And I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but buying silver right now and then trading it to gold when the ratio between the two of them correct. Right now, they're historically out of whack. Historically, in terms of its relationship, silver's relationship to gold, or geologically. And it might be, because of the distortions and the manipulation, the most undervalued asset on the planet. And when we see the biggest money in the world draining the supply of it from the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX market, where these are the two price setting mechanisms of the world, they're being drained. The biggest money in the world is taking delivery off of the exchanges, something we never saw before, and doing it in copious fashion. It's the most undervalued asset, period. So I would tell people, start with silver. If 10,000 were 100,000, I'd say, well, let's get you some gold too. Because even still, it would be majority silver. But Right now, silver, ultimately gold, and we will help people transition from silver to gold when the time comes without having to pay any money. You just trade your silver into gold. And that is a path that we have been talking about for the last year and a half now, and one that I still think is the right way to go.
And so if they purchase or work with you, are you a broker, or how does that work?
Yeah, our new website will be done next week.
Okay.
We're launching it internally on Friday,
Mhm.
which is today is Wednesday. In 2 days, we're going to launch it
Mhm.
internally to do a soft launch for us over the weekend for us all to find holes in it and
Mhm.
make purchases and see if they go through the right way with the credit cards and all. Our website now, milesfranklin.com, does not allow that. Our online store has been closed for the last year and a half. There was too much fraud back then, and we have figured out a way. I've been assured that that will be mitigated. Let's hope. But in any case, they would call us or send us an email at info@milesfranklin.com, where we would send them a current price list. We could answer any questions by email that they have, or return their phone call if they say, hey, call me, please. I have some questions. Our brokers, by and large, average over 20 years of experience. Most of them are my friends that go back to elementary school and high school, believe it or not, almost every one of them. We are a family run business. My father and I started this company. My sister works in it. My wife works in it. And over 24 of my closest friends that I've known my whole life work with me, believe it or not. And so we are family. So you would talk to someone who would represent our name brand as if it were their own, might even be their own, and act accordingly. So we would answer questions, help people get comfortable, tell them how to purchase, show them what they can purchase, show them how we do it. We send them an invoice. They pay for it either by a personal check, an e-check, or a wire or cryptocurrency. And by the way, with the cryptocurrency, we're not keeping it. There's a company called BitPay
Yeah.
where I send you a BitPay link. You send your Bitcoin or your Ethereum to BitPay, and boom, they send us instantly a wire. I did a $2 million order on a Sunday, and BitPay had that money in my bank account on a Sunday in a matter of minutes. It was the
Wow.
craziest thing I've ever seen. So in any case, it's a really neat system. But anyways, after we receive the money, and we send everything out to people by UPS, fully insured,
Mhm.
in a very, very, very nondescript manner.
Mhm.
And we insure things supplementally through Lloyd's of London and Travelers Insurance, so that, if I'm sending you a $10,000 package, to your example, I'll insure it through UPS for $200.
Mhm.
That means that driver is going to be like, oh, better set this down, instead of throwing it in the back of his truck and keeping it out of the Amazon stream. Takes it out, rings your doorbell. This is adult signature required. It's $200 insured, so I'm going to take good care of it. But I'm not going to be alerted to the fact that what's in this small box that's worth $10,000.
Sure.
Lloyd's of London and Travelers have programs that mesh with the UPS tracking software, and it's fully insured for the whole 10,000.
Mhm.
When it is signed for, the insurance is taken off, but it allows people the privacy, even that the drivers don't understand what it is that they're dropping off. They just know it's a mildly insured program, a package that needs to have adult signature. They don't know that it's 10 or 20 or 100 grand, that it really is.
Sure. Well, this has been awesome, Andy. I learned a lot. I'm hoping our listeners did. And I want people to research gold and silver investments and contact you and your company. I'll look forward to the new website launch. We're going to link everything in the show notes, and tag you guys with that. And again, I thank you. This is a very, very important topic. To me, it's sort of newer on my radar to as far as talking about it publicly, but getting your financial health in order is going to lead to better physical and mental health. And this could definitely be a way, investing into gold and silver and into real assets, because when the time comes, the dollar collapses or hyperinflation keeps going through the roof, you're going to wish you did that. So
I agree. I agree. And I enjoyed our conversation as well. Have me back anytime. I'm happy to come back, pick up where we left off. I wish you, your family, and everyone out there very happy, healthy new year, happy holidays, and everyone take care. And feel free to reach out to us, info@milesfranklin.com. And mention Josh Lewis in this podcast or in the subject line, and we'll make sure that your listeners are getting the best price in America and personalized service. And I'd love to come back after the new year, pick up where we left off, and see what's going on, because I have a feeling there'll be a lot to talk about in a very short period of time.
Yeah, same here. And there's some questions I didn't get to, but my thoughts are stirring for part 2. So we're going to definitely do that, Andy.
Look forward to that, man. All the best to you, Josh. Thanks for having me on. And like I said, I'll look forward to picking up where we left off, hopefully real soon.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
All the best.